Relational context of dependent origination. The essential aim of dependent origination is to illustrate the origin and cessation of suffering, dukkha. The term dukkha plays a pivotal role in Buddhadhamma and appears in several key teachings. For example, the three characteristics and the Four Noble Truths. To understand the complete meaning of the term dukkha, one must set aside the common translation of suffering and examine the threefold classification of dukkha, along with its commentarial explanations. Dukkha, dukkhata, a feeling of pain, dukkha vedana, as commonly understood, physical suffering, example aches and pains, and mental suffering, example grief. Disease, the suffering arising from encounters with undesirable and disturbing sense objects. Viparinama dukkhata, suffering associated with change, suffering inherent in pleasure. Pleasure becomes suffering or produces suffering. Due to the transitoriness of pleasure, a person may feel at ease, without any disturbance, but after experiencing a more pleasant form of ease, the original state of ease may feel unpleasant. It is as if suffering lies latent and manifests when pleasure fades away. The degree of suffering is proportional to the degree of pleasure that precedes it. Suffering can even arise while experiencing pleasure. If a person becomes aware of the fleeting nature of that pleasure, and when pleasure ends, the sadness of separation follows in its wake. 3. Sankhara dukkhata, the dukkha of conditioned phenomena. The dukkha of all things that arise from causes and conditions, that is, the five aggregates, khandha, including path, magga and fruit, phala, which are technically classified as transcendent. All conditioned things are oppressed by conflicting component factors. All things arise and pass away. They are imperfect. They exist in the stream of causes and conditions which generate suffering for someone who does not understand the nature of conditionality, who with craving, grasping and ignorance foolishly resists this process and who does not engage with it wisely. The third kind of dukkha reveals the inherent nature of conditioned phenomena, but it also has a psychological dimension. This state of imperfection and stress prevents complete satisfaction with conditioned phenomena, and conditionality causes suffering for a person who relates to things with craving, grasping and ignorance. The meaning of this third kind of dukkha is thus all-inclusive. It corresponds with the meaning of dukkha in the three characteristics: all conditioned things are dukkha. The pressure and instability inherent in all things may lead to the dukkha of the Four Noble Truths, whereby craving, grasping and ignorance come to fruition as suffering. And whereby the five aggregates of nature develop into the five aggregates of clinging of human beings. In this context, one can include the three kinds of feeling: pleasure, pain, and neutral feeling. Painful feeling is part of the first kind of dukkha, dukkha dukkhata. Pleasant feeling, sukha vedana, is introduced in the second factor of Viparinama Dukkha, although neutral feeling or equanimity escapes the first two factors. It is included in the final factor of Sankhara Dukkha. Even equanimity is ephemeral, transient, and subject to causes and conditions. If one is enchanted by equanimity and wishes to indulge in it, one cannot escape the dukkha of conditioned phenomena. The commentaries elaborate by stating that neutral feeling, upekkha vedana, along with all other formations in the three planes of existence, are sankhara dukkha, as they are oppressed by arising and dissolution. In sum, all three kinds of feeling are incorporated in these kinds of dukkha. The teaching of dependent origination reveals how dynamics inherent in nature develop into human problems as a consequence of ignorance, craving, and clinging. At the same time, these natural dynamics reveal how the interrelatedness of phenomena takes the form of a stream. Various aspects of the stream may be distinguished. Conditioned phenomena are interrelated. They exist dependent on other conditioned phenomena. They are inconstant, not remaining the same even for an instant. They are not autonomous, they have no true self, and they have no first cause. Seen from another angle, the way in which phenomena manifest in the world, as appearing, growing, and declining, reveals their fluid nature. This fluid nature exists because things are made up of interrelated components. The stream of phenomena flows on because all of its components are unstable, inconstant, and without true substance. The particular features of interdependent processes both point to the impossibility of a first cause and also allow for the manifestation of distinct fluid entities. If things were to truly possess a self, they would be stable. If things were stable even for a moment, they would by definition not be mutually dependent, and there would be no fluid entities. But without a stream of interdependent phenomena, nature would not exist in the way it does. A self or fixed substance within phenomena would render true causal interactions impossible. Because all things are impermanent, inconstant, and subject to decay, insubstantial and interconnected, there is a stream of conditions manifesting as distinct natural phenomena. The Pali term for impermanence and instability is anicca. The term for oppression through birth and decay, for inherent stress, conflict, and imperfection, is dukkha. The term for selflessness or insubstantiality, the absence of any internal or external essence or agent that dictates things according to desire, is anatta. The teaching of dependent origination reveals these three characteristics and describes the interrelated sequence of phenomena. The process of dependent origination applies to both material things, Buddhadhamma, and to immaterial things, Namadhamma, to both the material world and to human life, which is comprised of both physical and mental attributes. This process manifests as particular laws of nature, one Dhamma Niyama, the general law of cause and effect, two Utu Niyama, the laws of the material world, physical laws, 3 bija niyama, laws governing living things, including genetics, biological laws. 4 chitta niyama, laws governing the workings of the mind, psychological laws. And 5 kama niyama, law of karma, intentional action, karmic laws, which determines human well-being and is directly linked to ethics. Again, all natural processes, including the dynamics of karma, are possible because things are impermanent and insubstantial. This fact may be at odds with how people commonly feel, yet if things were permanent, stable, and possessed a solid core, none of the above laws of nature would hold true. Also, these laws confirm that there is no first cause for things, no creator God. Conditioned things arise dependent on causes, and they are interrelated. They have no fixed core. A bed, to take a simple example, is composed of various parts, which have been assembled following a prescribed plan. There exists no essential substance of the bed apart from these components. Taking these components apart, the bed no longer exists. There exists merely a notion of a bed, which is a thought in the mind. Even particular notions do not exist in isolation, but are connected to other concepts. The notion of a bed only has significance in relation to the notions of lying down, a level plane position, space, etc. People's awareness and understanding of particular designations is linked to their understanding of the relational factors of that particular entity. But when recognition of the object has been made, habitual attachment in the form of craving and grasping leads to the person to be convinced of the object's substantiality. The object is separated from its relational context, and true discernment of the object is obstructed. Selflessness and possessiveness come to the fore. Selfishness and possessiveness come to the fore. As mentioned above, things do not have a first cause or original source. Tracing back the causes and conditions ad infinitum, one still cannot find a first cause. There is a strong impulse in people, however, to seek an original source for phenomena, and as a consequence they assign undue importance to particular entities. This impulse to find a source conflicts with the truth, and notions associated with whatever is taken as a source become a form of perceptual aberration. People give up their inquiry into causality too soon. A correct investigation would go on to inquire into the cause of what is being taken as the source and conclude that this line of inquiry is endless. Things exist in mutual dependence, and therefore there is no first cause. Indeed, one can pose the question, why is it necessary for things to originate from a primal source? The belief in a creator God is equally at odds with nature. This belief stems from the observation and common assumption that human beings are responsible for producing things like tools, implements and crafts. Therefore, everything in the universe must also have a creator. The logic of this reasoning, however, is flawed. People separate the act of production from the natural context of conditionality. In fact, human production is only one aspect of conditionality. In the act of production, humans are one factor among many in a conditional process, all of which combine to reach a desired result. The distinction here from a purely material process is that mental factors, example desire, accompanied by intention, also play a role. But these mental factors must combine with other factors in a conditional process to bring about a desired end. For example, when building a house, a person influences other factors to bring about completion. If humans were above the conditional process, they could build a house out of thin air. But this is impossible. Creation, therefore, is not separate from conditionality, and since all conditioned things exist as parts of an ongoing causal process, our Creator God plays no role at any stage. Another line of reasoning that contradicts the truth is similar to the idea of a first cause, is the idea that at the beginning there was nothing. This idea is connected to and stems from a belief in self. The identification with composite parts that comprise in an individual form. A person establishes a notion of self and attaches to this notion. In addition, he may believe that originally this self did not exist, but rather came into being at a later time. This limited way of thinking, of getting stuck on an object and not having a fluid outlook on things, is an attachment to conventional labels and a misunderstanding of conventional truth. It lies behind the need to find a first cause or Creator God as the source of all phenomena, giving rise to such conflicting ideas as how can something immortal produce something that is mortal, or how can transient things spring from the eternal. In relation to the causal, the interrelated flow of phenomena, there is no need to speak of an enduring or a temporary self, unless one is referring to conventional truth, samadhi satcha. Again, one can ask, why is it necessary to have nothing before something can exist? In any case, speculation on such topics as first cause and our Creator God is considered to be of little value in Buddhadhamma, because it is irrelevant to the practical application of the teachings for bringing about true spiritual well-being. Even though these philosophical considerations can lead to a broad worldview, as shown above, they can be passed over since a focus on practical application leads to the same benefits. Attention here, therefore, should be on applying the teachings to everyday life. As mentioned earlier, human beings are comprised of the 5 aggregates. Nothing exists separately from these aggregates, dwelling either inside them or out. Nothing owns or controls the aggregates and governs life. The 5 aggregates function according to dependent origination. They are part of the interrelated flow of conditions. All of the components in this process are unstable. They all arise and pass away, and they condition further arising and decay. The interdependency of the components enables there to be a causal process and continual stream of formations. The 5 aggregates are marked by the 3 universal characteristics. 1. They are impermanent and unstable, subject to constant arising and passing away. 2. They are continually oppressed by arising and dissolution. They inevitably produce suffering for one who engages with them by way of ignorance and attachment. And 3. They are void of any substantial essence or self that is able to dictate things according to desire. These 5 aggregates, perpetually shifting and inherently insubstantial, follow their own nature and proceed according to the flow of interrelated conditions. Unawakened human beings, however, make the mistake of resisting this flow by identifying with certain phenomena. They then want this imagined fixed entity to last or proceed in a desired fashion. At the same time, the eddying currents within the flow of conditions conflict with desire, causing stress and increasing desire and attachment. When desire is thwarted, the struggle to establish, control and stabilize an identity becomes more intense, which results in ever greater disappointment, anguish and despair. A dim understanding of truth may lead a person to conclude that change is inescapable and that one's cherished self may disappear. But this consideration only leads to firmer attachment intertwined with deep-seated anxiety. Such a state of mind is comprised of 3 defilements: avijja, ignorance of the truth; the mistaken belief in a self; tanha, the wish for this surmised self to be or not to be in a particular way; and upadana, grasping, binding this self to things. These defilements are deeply embedded in the mind, and they control the behavior of human beings, overtly or covertly. They mold people's personalities and shape their destiny. It is fair to say that they are the source of suffering for all unawakened people. The preceding paragraphs have revealed a conflict between 2 distinct processes. 1. The course of life that is governed by the law of the 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha and anatta, which is a fixed law of nature. It manifests as birth, aging and death, both in an ordinary and a deeper sense. 2. Ignorance of the course of life, the mistaken belief in a stable, enduring self and a subsequent attachment, accompanied by fear and anxiety. The conflict is between laws of nature and a mistaken self-view, between the causal dynamics in nature and people's desires. People construct a self which then impedes the flow of nature. When people's desires are unsound or thwarted, the result is suffering in its various manifestations. This results in a life of ignorance, attachment, enslavement, resistance to nature, and misery. Conventionally speaking, the second process comprises 2 selves. First is the self or entity within nature that changes according to causes and conditions. Although no true self exists, it is possible to separate and distinguish one natural dynamic or flow from other natural dynamics, and for practical purposes one can assign a conventional label of self to each individual dynamic. Second is a false self or fixed entity which one imagines to be real and clings to with ignorance, craving and grasping. The first self, the dynamic entity, is not a cause for attachment, but the second self, which is superimposed on the first self, is defined by attachment. It is inevitably undermined by the nature of the first self and thus causes suffering. A life of ignorance and attachment instills fear and anxiety in the hearts, affects behaviour and makes people unwitting slaves to their desires. It increases selfishness, a perpetual search for personal gratification, possessiveness and a lack of consideration for others. In order to reinforce and affirm their desires, people latch onto and identify with those views, opinions, doctrines, self-belief systems, etc. that meet the needs of the accord with desire. They cherish and cling to these views, etc., as if protecting their very selves. As a result, they build a barrier that prevents them from accessing the truth. They hide from the truth. This rigidity of mind means that their critical faculties are impaired, and it can give rise to obstinacy, an inability to tolerate or listen to the views of others. When people establish ideas, views and beliefs on what is good, what should be achieved, and what is the proper way to reach desired goals, they behave accordingly, and they observe corresponding traditions and customs. Their behaviour may even be naive or irrational as a result. They may act simply out of an attachment to such traditions and customs, possessing only a faint understanding of the causal relationships of the factors involved. Hence they lack a clear understanding of cause and effect. This is reflected in the lives of some religious seekers who uphold various ascetic traditions and practices with great intensity, believing that such behaviour will guarantee liberation, realization, or a passage to heaven. They then go on to criticize and look down on other people as a consequence of these established practices. At the same time, on a deeper level, such people are worried about the preservation of their cherished self, which is a fabricated concept, although they do not really know what or where this assumed self is. They still lug it around and protect it, and because they fear that at any moment the self may perish, they grab after whatever provides a sense of self-affirmation. However obscure such things may be, life thus becomes restricted and their well-being is shaped by the fortunes of this so-called self. These repercussions do not merely affect the individual. The conflict of suffering extends outwards, causing social conflict. All social problems created by human beings stem from a life of ignorance and attachment. The detailed presentation of dependent origination outlines the origin of a life of suffering. It outlines the origin of a sense of self, which inevitably results in suffering. Breaking the chain of dependent origination is to end a life of suffering. To eradicate all suffering arising from a self, this leads to a life of wisdom, non-attachment, freedom, and harmony with nature. A life of wisdom, of direct knowledge of the truth, entails deriving benefit from one's relationship to nature, which is equivalent to living in harmony with nature. To live in harmony with nature is to live freely and with non-attachment, an escape from craving and grasping, and a life of non-attachment relies on a knowledge of conditionality, along with an appropriate relationship to things. Buddhist teachings do not recognize a supernatural entity existing above nature and having power over it. If something were to exist beyond nature, to transcend nature, then by definition it could have no influence over nature. Whatever is involved in nature is a part of nature. Natural phenomena exist according to causes and conditions. They do not arise haphazardly. All amazing occurrences that appear as miracles or marvels arrive from and proceed according to causes and conditions. We call these events miracles because the causes and conditions remain hidden. As soon as the causes and conditions are known, the sense of wonder disappears. The terms supernatural and preternatural are merely ways of speaking. They do not refer to something that exists apart from nature. A related subject is the distinction between man and nature. The expressions man and nature or man controls nature are simply figures of speech. In fact, human beings are one part of nature, and humans can control nature only to the extent that they exist as one condition in nature, influencing subsequent conditions and giving rise to particular results. What is unique in the case of human interaction is the involvement of mental conditions, including volitional, and therefore the term creation is used for human activities. But all the elements in the act of creation are, without exception, conditional factors. Human beings are unable to create anything out of thin air or in isolation as somehow separate from the conditional process. When humans understand the requisite conditions leading to desired results, they enter the process as one determinant factor, shaping other conditions to reach a desired end. There are two stages to successful interaction. The first is knowledge, and the second is to act as a condition for subsequent conditions. The initial stage, equivalent to wisdom, is essential. With wisdom, one can engage with things according to one's wishes. A wise engagement with things entails benefiting from one's relationship to nature, or even controlling nature, and this benefit extends to a person's relationship to both material things and the mind. Because human beings and nature exist in a mutual relationship, to live wisely is to live in harmony with nature. With wisdom, one has control over one's mental faculties, control over one's mind. One has control over oneself. A life of wisdom has two dimensions. Internally wise persons are calm, clear and joyous. When encountering pleasant objects, they are not seduced or reckless. When separated from delightful objects, they are not upset or despondent. They do not entrust their happiness to material things by allowing these things to govern their lives, and externally they are fluent and agile. They are prepared to engage with things appropriately and reasonably. There are no inner attachments or fixations that cause obstruction, prejudice, or confusion. The following words by the Buddha demonstrate the difference between a life of attachment and a life of wisdom. Bhikkhus, the uninstructed worldling feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. The instructed noble disciple too feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. In this case, bhikkhus, what is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the instructed noble disciple and the uninstructed worldling? Bhikkhus, when the uninstructed worldling is contacted by a painful feeling, he grieves and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. He feels two feelings, bodily feeling and mental feeling. Suppose an archer were to strike a man with an arrow, and then strike him afterwards with a second arrow, so that the man would feel a feeling caused by two arrows. So too, when the uninstructed worldling is contacted by a painful feeling, he feels two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. Being contacted by that painful feeling, he harbours aversion towards it. When he harbours aversion towards the painful feeling, the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling lies behind this. Being contacted by painful feeling, he seeks delight in sense pleasure. For what reason? Because the uninstructed worldling does not know of any escape from painful feeling other than sense pleasure.